I've never really talked about Kemco on this channel in the past, and given that I'm a fan of retro-style JRPGs and I play a lot of them, and I talk about them a lot on this channel, I feel like that's an omission that I need to remedy. So, Seek Hearts from Kemco has landed on consoles this week. That's the one that you're seeing on the screen here in front of you. And given that that's happened, I figured I should take this as an opportunity to really start to talk about this publisher, because Kemco obviously attempts to appeal to fans of the old style RPGs with its titles, but it's always how I've had such a love-hate relationship with this company over the years, one that's probably veered more towards the hate than the love, but they're an interesting one, and I figured that now is a good time to talk about them. I will say from the start that I think that Seek Hearts is actually a better effort from Kemco. Some of the issues that I've had with Kemco RPGs in the past, this one seems to address. Now, I'm only a couple of hours into it, admittedly, and I'm certainly not ready to write a review of it, but one of the biggest issues that I've had with Kemco JRPGs is that they're ridiculously easy, even on the absolutely highest difficulty setting possible. It's with quite a few of them, it's easy just to really walk your way through without ever really being threatened even by the bosses. But in this one, I actually managed to even lose a battle against a boss, which is surprising. Now, it's not handled, the difficulty's not handled in a particularly great way. You play on the highest difficulty level, and all you really need to do is just grind up some levels, because unlike some of the better JRPGs out there, it doesn't have the kind of skill system that really encourages you on the higher difficulty levels to try different things and tactics. It's still a way, I mean, you can still brute force your way through it. So it's not perfectly executed, but the fact that there is that bit of challenge there was enough to keep me more engaged as I've been playing along. The other thing is, the storytelling in this one is better. Now, storytelling is always a very subjective thing, and you know, the themes and all of that kind of stuff are still very simplistic in this one, but so many of Kemco's JRPGs really sound like they're written by the children of the developers. They're very... It's not just that they're simple. Simple can be very good. Simple can be great, especially with retro-style RPGs. I prefer them to be brief and kind of to the point with the dialogue and the narrative. But the Kemco JRPGs are written childlike. They're very naive. They're very... The language they use is quite unimpressive, very juvenile. And that might be partly because of localization when it comes to the English versions, but it's also, I think, an underlying problem with these games. And it is that I imagine that the developers are really rushed to create stories because they churn them out so quickly that there's not really that quality control in there to make sure that the stories are not just interesting concepts, or not just written, you know, so that there is a story throughout the whole game, but there's also a level of maturity to the writing and the way that the characterization is handled and all of that kind of stuff. So those are issues that I generally have with Kemco RPGs. I have it to a much less extent so far with Seek Hearts, and I'm actually finding myself quite enjoying this game against all odds. It's one that I've actually come back to a few times, and when I checked the time clock that shows how many hours I've been playing, I'm finding that my sessions with the game are longer than I would have expected for a Kemco RPG. So it's probably damning it with faint praise, but by Kemco RPG standards, this is actually quite good. Now, in saying that, I'll probably find the second half of the game to be terrible and all that. But anyway, it's got an interesting concept too. You play as a kind of a mechanical human who has been churned out of a factory somewhere, and he's got amnesia. He doesn't remember who he is or what he is, but he does know that he's different to the other mechanical beings that are created in this world. So he sets out on a quest to try and work out who he is and his identity and stuff like that. And he's followed, of course, by a couple of other people, including a girl that, you know, he grew up with. So there's that kind of sisterly relationship, and a couple of other characters that join in along the way as well. And of course, there's those revelations about, you know, was created for a higher purpose, and the antagonists of the game have an issue with his creation and why he was put on the earth and all that kind of stuff. It's all very it's all very kind of created by somebody who was a fan of Final Fantasy and then just kind of rolled with it. Didn't necessarily understand the depth of thematic intensity of Final Fantasy games, but certainly understood, that Final Fantasy was a good story and really melded that kind of science fiction and fantasy together in an interesting way. I'm not sure why my characters are just standing there. This bit of footage, I must have gone to get a drink or something. But yeah, the story's actually not bad. Like I said, the narrative is a little bit more mature in how it's been written and stuff, and the concept is very pleasing and pleasant, and the kind of thing you'd expect from a better mobile game, I guess. It's one that's engaging enough that you'll play it for short bursts on your phone, or you wouldn't mind having it sitting there on your phone when you're on a train or whatever. But it's obviously not going to be up to the standards of a Persona or a Tokyo Mirage Sessions or a Octopath Traveler compared to a kind of retro style JRPG. The other problem that I have with a lot of Kemco games is the inconsistencies within them, and I'm sure that has to do with how quickly they're churned out as well. But they just hit so many different notes, and the systems are all disjointed and don't necessarily work well together, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's thrown in there for mobile game purposes which has no place in console RPGs, which also tends to frustrate me. But to run through them quickly, firstly, the visual style. I mean, you look at the overworld and you see a very cheap kind of RPG Maker style environment, and that's an engine that I'm sure Kemco's developers own and work on, because it's the same in every single one of their games, and it's just not pleasant to look at. In fact, RPG Maker has better RPG Maker-like visuals than these games do. The battle system is not so bad. The enemy sprites are nicely animated, the characters are pretty decent. It's better than when they do those 3D efforts and they end up looking like cheap PlayStation 1 titles. So there is a nice bit of animation there. But to show you the inconsistency, the character portraits are actually really nice. They're quite attractive character designs. So they're not animated and they're not vibrant and they're not like a Compile Heart or Gust game when they do a similar thing, but they are nicely detailed, nicely designed, and they help to build the character as much as the actual storytelling does. The systems have so much nonsense going on in them, and that is annoying given how simple the combat system really is. So you've got to give fairies candy and they leave you treats in Santa stockings for some reason. I don't know what that mechanic is, but it's there. One character, the main character, doesn't level up like the other characters. He gets levels, but you've got to feed him weapons to boost his power because his levels don't increase his statistics that much. And again, that's pretty obviously there because they want to turn the loot grind into a mechanic to work for mobile. And there's another system which really frustrated me, and I can't remember what it was. It's really difficult to want to engage with the game's systems because really once you get into the combat, you're really only going to be using a small range of attacks that work, and then, like I mentioned earlier in the video, brute forcing your way through the rest of the combat. So a lot of what's in these games is unnecessary, and that's certainly the case with this one as well. And it's a pity, because if Kemco really focused on just creating a very simple, elegant combat system that was more reminiscent of the simple, elegant combat systems of those early Final Fantasy games, then this would be something that would really hit a spot for retro RPG fans. But this effort to either be innovative or throw systems in there for the sake of throwing systems in there, or do something to improve the monetization of the game on mobile, which is then stripped out for the console game without the mechanics being rebalanced. All of that stuff just lets these games down, and it lets Seek Hearts down as well. So while I'm enjoying the overall game, I do find the mechanical side of it just to be a bit of a drain, unfortunately. One thing I do admire about Kymco is they never stop trying, and they do create some decent little games over time. There's one I think it's called Utenji or Udenji, which is a roguelike, which is actually really enjoyable. It's available on Switch and whatever, and I really did have a good time with that. And they also created a visual novel, which I think is quite spectacular, called Raging Loop. And it shows that Kymco has storytellers and all of that kind of stuff that can really do a good job. So yeah, this is certainly not an issue with Kemco itself. It's just they need to update how they approach their retro-style JRPGs, because those retro-style JRPGs don't really appeal to retro-style JRPG fans. Anyway, that's enough of my rant. Thank you for watching my video. I'm glad I was finally able to talk about Kemco and get some of my issues out in the air. Please do like and subscribe, and please do back me on Patreon if you enjoy my videos. Otherwise, we will see you at the next one.